Thank you for coming today. We could stay on chapters 3 and 4 for a very long time, right? That's dealing with anger is chapter 3, and proper speech is chapter 4. But I'd like to move on to good friendship and show us how to tie the teachings or the trainings actually on uprooting anger and resentment and improper speech into good friendship, because the issue or the focus is on how to become good friends. He said that friendship in the Dharma is the whole of spiritual life, good friends in the Dharma. So there's something beyond having a relationship with books, having a relationship with ideas, and that our practice has to translate into just the way we live with other living beings. And that's where the joy comes from in our life. So that we can find joy in whatever activity that we're doing. We can even find joy. I loved my brother because he was just nobody that you could fight with. I don't care what your view was. Your view could be completely opposite of his, but he found a way to bring a kind of humor and acceptance into it that made him able to get along with everybody. You didn't have to agree with him at all. And he would even have you laughing at yourself when he was sure he was right and that you were wrong. And it is a great quality. It's a great skill, because it helps us to get beyond our conceptualization of things, and it helps us to be accepting and respectful at the highest level of others. We say we respect others, but nobody respects others as much as they respect themselves. Even when they're being self-deprecating, even that is a kind of pride and so when we have the capacity actually to be with friend or foe and consider both just friend, then we know we're making progress, and it has ceased to be a practice for us, but our feet are firmly on the path. So I want to go into the introduction, and we're trying to do this sort of like listening as opposed to reading, but so just listening and that transmission that comes from listening, and then we'll go back into reading. Strong communities depend on the personal relations between their members, and the most basic relation between people outside of family connections is that of friendship. So with part 5, we move from personal cultivation, uprooting anger, using right speech, the focus of the previous chapters, to the establishment of interpersonal relations, and we naturally begin with friendship. The Buddha placed special emphasis on one's choice of friends, which he saw as having a profound influence on one individual's development, as well as on the creation of a harmonious and ethically upright community. So good friendship is essential not only because it benefits us in time of trouble, it satisfies our social instincts, and it enlarges our sphere of concern from just the self to others. It is critical because good friendship plants in us the sense of discretion, the ability to distinguish between good and bad, right and wrong, and to choose the honorable over the expedient. Therefore, the Buddha says that all other good qualities unfold from good friendship. And the popular Mangala Sutta, which enumerates 32 blessings, begins with the avoidance of foolish persons and association with the wise. The Buddha talked about 4 sources of benefit for the lay person. One is personal initiative. We all often talk about if one should wish. One has to have an aspiration, and then they have to put action to the aspiration. So there's the personal aspiration, there's the protection of one's wealth, there is good friendship, and there is balanced living. And then he follows this with 4 sources of benefit in future lives: faith, virtuous behavior, generosity, and wisdom. Monastic life in early Buddhism, and now most times I just talk about lay people, but now that we have an equal number of lay and monastic, so by the end of this month there'll be 9 monastic in the community, 9 lay people, and then we have our wonderful lay sangha, and so it's just really growing nicely. But I want to say something, I want to pull in some references to monastic life because it is a little different kind of life. In other words, our aspiration is different. In one sense, the way that you love your family and love your loved ones, we take the Sangha as our family. And so when we're thinking, I just want to love you more, who is that? That's for the Sangha. So we live for the Sangha. We no longer think about having houses and cars, and well, we got to have cars, but we don't have to have new ones anymore. When folk get through with theirs, they just give them to us, and we putt to the store and back, and that's fine. It's enough. It's enough because something else is in our view. So the lifestyles are not exactly the same, and it doesn't mean that one is deficient. That's what I want both monastics and lay to understand. It doesn't mean that one is superior over the other. Everything in its own time, in its own place, with its own reference. And so he spoke of monastic life, and it says, in early Buddhism, is sometimes imagined to be a solitary adventure in which the aspirant perpetually dwells alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent, and resolute. And these are indeed texts that convey such an impression. For instance, in verse after verse, the Kagavasana Sutta of the Sutapatthana enjoins the earnest seeker to forsake the crowd and wander alone like the horn of a rhinoceros. Taken in isolation, these texts can be read as endorsing a highly individualistic version of monastic life in which all companionship is to be avoided. But in actuality, however, just the opposite is the prevalent model. And the reason I say this is because most monastics, when they come, they got that idea. They just want to be, reclusive, closeted. They don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to deal with anybody. And they think that this is the perfect example of monkdom and monk life. So they come in here and they don't want to do anything, don't want to do any work. They don't want to, they don't want to talk to anybody. But that is not the model. If we take it in isolation, it appears to be the model, but it is not. In fact, he created a community of men and women dedicated to full-time practice. So what would that look like? It means that we're not locked away, isolated from everybody else, but we are joined together with them. But to do that, we have to overcome the obstacles that cause us to pull apart, to be separate, a need to be separate. And so this becomes a training and a practice ground. Y'all know we're getting ready for something, right? This becomes a training ground for how to come together in unity and in fellowship and in love. So I'd like to go first to the qualities of a true friend. And it says that there are 7 factors that a true friend possesses. What 7? He gives what is hard to give. He does what is hard to do. He patiently endures what is hard to endure. He reveals his secrets to you, meaning like he confesses his faults. He preserves your secrets. I mean, he doesn't tell your faults to others. He does not forsake you when you are in trouble. He does not roughly despise you. One should associate with a friend who possesses these 7 factors. So, if I want a friend, I have to be a friend. So this is our litmus test right here. These seven qualities. Then he talks about if you find one who has those 7 qualities, one should resort to him and attend on him, even if he dismisses you. Now, that can be a little bit difficult. I mean, let's say that you're trying to be friends with somebody because you see that they have certain qualities and they're not warming up to you. And he says, that doesn't matter. You still hold them in high esteem because it's the quality that you're coming close to. A lot of times we get confused about the qualities of being with what we see as what gives us a certain kind of self-aggrandizement. So chatty people, like 2 kinds of people, other chatty people or people who listen to chatty people, you know, and if you're neither one of those, then, you know, that what, they don't like me, you know, and so we get this idea, you know, we like project onto someone else or deproject, we decide that they don't like us because they're not meeting, you know, some need that we have. And our basic friendships are based on need. You know, if you look at them, most of them are. There's something the other is offering. And when they're not, they cease to be our friends. And so he's teaching us that we have to re-examine what our definition of good friendship is. And then first we have to see if we qualify. And when we see we're lacking, we just like, look right there. I need to work on that. And most of us know ourselves. No, we try to be good people, you know. But there's these habitual tendencies and there's these hindrances that we have that make us not as good as we even appear to be sometimes. But we know ourselves all the time. I hear people say, I just don't know. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I mean, we know ourselves. But sometimes it's like hard to look at. Like we just don't want to look at that. You know, and we'll go to our good side. But I do, but I do this, and but I do that. And I think this way sometimes. But he says to look at our side that needs bumping up and own it. He said, you got to own it. I love how he encourages us to own our shortcomings because then they are not, we can see them from a more impersonal life because everybody has them, you know. We don't have to be down about it. We don't have to feel so bad about it. We do need to recognize, you know, just in recognizing and having the aspiration to look at it until we penetrate what is the obstacle that keeps us vectoring over in that way. But if we are afraid or refuse to look at it, then we can never uproot it. And so when we see someone acting in an unskillful way, then we can say within our Sangha, within our community, there's enough Dharma going on here. There are enough friends here that I know that person is working on that. They may not have penetrated yet. They may not have risen to the place that they can overcome that tendency. But yet I can think my best about them because I learned how to do that in chapter number 3. And it talks about how to not have resentment. And if we forgot that when we're studying on how to be a good friend, we can refer right back to chapter 3 and see where or how we subdue the resentment that may be arising because of some person's speech or some person's anger. And so it's constantly, we constantly have this movement, that I'm unskillful, you're unskillful, I'm unskillful, you're unskillful. But if I'm looking at my unskillfulness and not your unskillfulness, if I'm looking at my own and you're looking at your own, then we can each begin to work on our own. And when we come together, we find different ways of being with each other. You're just not going to be able to change me. I'm not going to try to change you. But we can each work on improving ourselves. And then give a space of time, like they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. We give a space of time for people to improve. And depending on where you come from, I used to cry all the time. I say, God, why do you love me so much? I wondered because I knew myself. I said, why do you love me so much? And then my pastor told me one time, he said, it's because of how much you feel that you've been forgiven that you feel that you're so loved. But if I thought I was good to begin with, then I wouldn't have that much respect for what I considered that love or that forgiveness, because it was just a little bit anyway. But knowing myself, how deeply entrenched, in unwholesomeness I was, that just that sense of unconditional love was great for me. And so the Buddha says that now we're moving into that state. The whole purpose of this practice is to grow up into the fullness of the measure of the stature of accomplished ones. And so we practice these things that we want other people to do. Now it's our turn, it's our job. And so he says that one should associate with one who possesses 7 qualities. What qualities? He's pleasing and agreeable. If you wishy-washy, okay one day and in a mood the next day, people just make a wide berth around because they don't know which way the wind is blowing today. It's just a self-protection mechanism. It is like, I don't know if she feels like being friendly today or not, so pleasing and agreeable. He is respected and esteemed. He is a speaker. He patiently endures being spoken to. That means that he has time to hear you. When you're having difficulty, or if he observes that there's difficulty, he immediately goes there to see if he can comfort or if he can help. I mean, are we that way? This is introspection now. He does not enjoin one to do what is wrong. Instead, he says, friend, don't do that. He patiently endures being spoken to. He gives deep talks. The person here in whom these qualities are found is a true friend, benevolent and compassionate, even if one is dismissed by him. One desiring a friend should resort to such a person. Four kinds of good friends. Young man, there are these 4 kinds of kind-hearted friends. The one who is helpful, the one who shares one's happiness and suffering, the one who points out what is good, and the one who is sympathetic. Then he talks about friendship in the household life, whether young, mature, old. They are accomplished in faith, in virtuous behavior. You notice how almost in every teaching the Buddha starts, when he's talking about qualities, he starts with what?
Faith.
Yeah, he starts with faith. Faith is a conviction in something. And I often talk about that, you know what I mean when I say bad. Bad people have more confidence in their badness than good people have in their goodness. We think that good is good to a point, but bad, they can go all the way. nonstop. But we've got to develop that kind of conviction in goodness. But to develop that kind of conviction in goodness, we have to be able to handle something, to be able to go through something, to be able to tolerate something. It's like it's just another day in Samsara, And so today a pot slipped and the soup spilled all over the floor. And somebody called me and I'm like, oh, okay. I said, I feel so sorry for them. They have to make the soup again. So I felt for what effort they would have to put forward. Again, I didn't worry about, the pot of soup hitting the floor and that's what I mean. Like, it doesn't matter what happens in the course of a day. What matters is how we meet it. Yeah, it's how we meet it. And we can meet it with compassion. And we can meet the one who's suffering with compassion. That's the mark, the sign of a good friend, a friendship. That friend may not always agree with you, but when you're suffering, that friend is there for you. And what you'll find is that most of the things that upset us over the course of the day, that cause us suffering, it doesn't have anything to do with what happened out there. It has everything to do with the thoughts that are in our own mind about that. So the next time you get upset with somebody, did you get angry with somebody, did you get frustrated with somebody, did you get impatient with somebody, that, just think about what is the precursor of that emotion that is just run amok. What is the precursor of that? It was a thought. So if you go back to the previous chapter, and he talked about the grounds for resentment. And the reason I'm doing it this way today is because I want to teach you how, not to use this as a book like you read, but how you connect the dots so that you can really get the picture. So it goes back to grounds for resentment. He says there are 10 grounds for resentment. What 10? Thinking they acted for my harm, one harbors resentment. Thinking they are acting for my harm, one harbors resentment. Thinking they are going to act for my harm, one harbors resentment. Thinking they acted for the resentment of one who I like, who's pleasing and agreeable to me, one harbors resentment. Thinking they are acting for the harm of one who's pleasing and agreeable to me, one harbors resentment. Thinking and he goes on, there are 10 of them. So what is the key word? Thinking. That's it right there. Thinking. So he's trying to point us towards training ourselves in how we think. And so he talks about giving up the kind of thinking that how ways to remove or eliminate resentment and anger. They acted for my harm, but what can be done about it? He says, think that way. And he says, well, I can do something about it. I can act for his harm, or I can do something about it. I can defend myself, or I can do something about it. I can, but he says that still produces a vexation in the mind, and one's peace will not be there. So we're responsible for our own peace. That's what I'm trying to say. And when we take responsibility, he said that then we start approaching freedom. Now this is really going against the stream of how we function in the Saha world. And so that's why he says, my Dharma and discipline is for those who have little dust in their eyes. That means some of us we can't function with this yet. So the strong then bear the infirmity of the weak. If you call yourself strong, if you think they should know better, then you should know better. So all of the trainings roll back, rolling all blames into one, always rolling back upon oneself until one has cooled whatever the fire is that's raging. And when one has cooled that fire, then you're in a position to take an appropriate action, a beneficial action, a useful action. Our mind goes immediately, so I just let people walk over me, so I just let them just do whatever they want to do. He's not saying that. He's saying that before you can take an action that is beneficial and that is useful, one has to be calm, one has to be cool, one has to be collected, and one has to have brought up a vast compassion and kindness into the moment. And that allows us to think differently. So if we think like we've always thought, then we'll continue to do what we've always done. Is that enough? That's what I have to ask myself. So there is a discipline to this training. And the only one who can do that for us is ourselves. That means that sometimes when I feel like saying something, the thought rose up before I could even tamp that puppy down. The thought rose up. But just because you think it, you don't have to say it. So it might be, I got to step out the room, step out the room. You know? This is self-training. No one should have to say 5 times, can I talk to you about it later? If tempers are flaring, if we're right in the midst of something, apply self-discipline to oneself, not the other person, to oneself. This is the training. But the thing is that when you're successful at it, and you might fail 5 or 10 times, then it's incumbent upon the other person, to exercise the opposite restraint. That's all. So one day it'll be one person, the next day it'll be the other person. This is how it goes until we advance to the place that neither becomes necessary. The thing is that it's possible, but it's only possible if we want it. So we have to ask ourselves, how much do we want it? He said, when one has good friends, good companions, good comrades, it can be expected of him that he will be virtuous, one who dwells restrained by the patimokkha, that's the training guidelines, that he will get to hear at will, without difficulty or trouble, talk concerned with the holy life that is conducive to opening up the heart. So it's a requirement for the opening of the heart. Rules never fixed anything. And we know rules don't work, laws don't work, laws are for the lawless. But one who has taken up the discipline restrains oneself. And it said that this will make his heart begin to open up, and he will arouse energy for abandoning unwholesome qualities and for cultivating wholesome qualities. So how does one arouse energy for abandoning the unwholesome? I just read it. Okay. When a monk has good friends, good companions, it can be expected of him that he will become virtuous, one who dwells restrained by the training rules. He will get to hear at will without trouble or difficulty, talk concerned with the holy life that is conducive to opening up the heart. That he will arouse energy for abandoning unwholesome qualities and for cultivating wholesome qualities. And that he will be wise, possessing the wisdom that discerns arising and passing away. So we know what arising and passing away is. The three wisdoms, that's the three knowledges of past lives, the coming and going of others, and the putting out of the influxes. And that which is noble and penetrative and leads to the complete destruction of suffering. So you see, this was a very short, I think this is the shortest chapter in the book on friendship. The longest chapters in the book are on anger and speech. Because the role of speech is so important that he says one of the two conditions for the arising of right view is the utterance of another. So some of it is like we study, we contemplate, we think, but that's all mixed up with how we're already thinking. You know, what's already in our mind. And he said that's why it's good to have a companion so that you can hear the utterance of another. When we're talking about the 10 courses of right action, you know, 4 of the 10 deal with speech, abstaining from false speech, from divisive speech, from harsh speech, and from idle chatter. He does not insist that speech must always be sweet and agreeable to the hearers. To the contrary, he holds that one should have no qualms about criticizing those who deserve criticism. But if the criticism rides on the vehicle of compassion and loving kindness, we learn how to give criticism constructively. He talked about 4 kinds of people. He talked about the one who doesn't tell a person when they're wrong, and he doesn't tell a person when they're right. He talked about the one who tells a person when they're wrong, but he doesn't, commend the person who's right. He talked about the one who doesn't tell a person when they're wrong, but he tells them when they're right. And he talks about the person who tells one when they're wrong and who tells one when they're right. And so he asked his disciples, which do you think is the best? And the disciples said, well, I think that equanimity is the goal. So you shouldn't tell anybody when they're wrong, and you shouldn't tell anybody when they're right. And the Buddha said, no, that's not right. He said, because what's important thing is knowing what should be said and what should not be said. And so he points us continually to speech, watching our speech, listening deeply. And it's the hardest part of our practice. I wanted to end there was one passage that I wanted to read today. I want to know, I am not one afflicted in mind, nor easily drawn by anger's whirl. I never become angry for long, nor does anger persist in me. And this was a recitation by one of the Devas. He said, this is the pathway leading to heaven. I am not one afflicted in mind, nor easily drawn by anger's whirl. But if I become angry, I never become angry for long, nor does anger persist in me. So that gives us our stages of accommodating where we are and reaching for the next bar. And then he talked about when we do wrong to another. Said it's important for one to ask for forgiveness. And it's important to forgive the one who asks. So there's a requirement on both sides. There is no one side to anything. No one side. Everything has two sides. And whichever side you find yourself on, he says to reflect on the condition of the mind state that causes me to be on this side of it. And then to look to the other side, because that's where my freedom lies. So sometimes there are things that we should take care of, but we're being all nice and soft and sweet because we want to be liked, or we want the people to think that we're really good, or for whatever reasons we do those things, other than that anger is truly not arising, right? And then sometimes what we do in secret is different from what we do openly. So openly, I can appear to be, like a uniter, but secretly, I'm a divider. It can come in the form of good advice because you have a certain view. I won't call it an agenda, I'll be benevolent. I'll say, there's a certain view, And when thinking of one's view, it would be good if they did this or if they looked at it this way. And so one goes to talk it out that way. So he tells us to consider these ways that we are dishonest with ourselves. Consider the ways in which we there is some deceit deep down inside. I love it when he talks to us about, and really where the rubber meets the road, because sometimes we can't see it until, like you can have a tumor growing in, and you don't know the tumor's there. I was watching this show on TV the other day, and they opened somebody up. They were doing a surgery because they saw something on the whatever, on the sonogram or on the whatever. But when they opened them, they saw something else that didn't show up on the sonogram, and they just closed him back up. He said, close him back up and just let him enjoy the time he has left. So some things are buried deep in us, and we can't see it except the knife of the Dharma cut and expose it to us. And so it's so wonderful for me when the Dharma exposes me, not to you, but when the Dharma exposes me to myself. Because that's my desire. That's what it's all for, to truly know myself. What about you? And at some point in that journey, one stops hiding, because one doesn't take it so personally. They just know that this is what goes with this particular life. Like if you want to live in a place where there's no vicissitudes, it's not here. It's not here. It's not on this plane. So if we think that there's nothing beyond here, although those who are wise, who've touched it, say that there is, the same ones who are guiding us on this path. But when you get there, you've gone too far for me. I don't think there's anything after this. Well, okay. But the ones who have recommended that you go in this way, because this is the way leading upward, a way that leads to, unless one totally unbinds from becoming, that there can be the rebirth linking consciousness that connects and produces a house suitable for one who has a certain personality, a certain temperament, a certain understanding, a certain kind of vast love and wisdom. More than this, this house is suitable for this personality, for this mind stream. So I'd like to know how many, Pannavati said last week there was some confusion around reading. And so he told everybody to read the 2 sections. Was it on
Speech.
Just on speech? Okay. And I wanted to know, was there anybody in here who was finished with the chapter on anger? You know what I mean by finished?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and we're gonna wear some creases out on those two chapters. They will find you, is what I'm saying. If you want to be found, and you can deliver yourself. And the greatest benefit is that we personally don't suffer so much. And when we stop suffering so much, we stop causing so much suffering for others. It's a wonderful path. And we can run fast or we can go slow, but just stay on the path. If anybody wants to share anything from this week, you're free to do that now. I thought I would hear all these stories about, boy, my anger was out of control this week. Because it's usually when you're studying about something that you know, like you're right there with it, and suddenly you just see it, and I'm, okay, so I read all of this about how not to be angry, so I'm not going to be angry this week, right? But everything is going to push your button, because the yeah, but nature is there. Yes.
So when I think about anger, I don't consider myself to be an angry person. However, I do know a lot of annoyances.
So a couple of people got angry with me this week because we were trying to finish up for our guests coming, and there were some things that were undone. And it was our meditation time. It's wonderful when we're meditating, you know, but people were on their way. So I tapped on the door and I said, meditation's great, but you can meditate later on your own time. Right now we have to finish something. And thank you. And I went away. 15 minutes later, they were still meditating. So then I came in. And somebody did let me know I was angry with you. I don't want anybody telling me when I can meditate and when I can't meditate. I get that, but if we live in community, we agreed to do certain things. If you don't want to do that, then you can go in your house and you can meditate whenever you want. But collectively, when we come together, then we have to agree to do some things we don't want to do. We can't do everything we want to do when we want to do it. And it's a great lesson because we lose our sense of entitlement, which causes us so much suffering. It's a great lesson because it helps develop our patience. It's a great lesson because it puts us in touch equally with the needs of others. It's a great lesson. And so without these lessons, we can't develop, right? So I believe that that's really the reason why the Buddha got together the community. He says it's about good friends being the whole of spiritual life, but I think he put us all together so that we could aggravate each other, until we got so sick of being aggravated that we just abandon the whole thing and we give up our aggravation. Because you can sit on a mountaintop and cultivate all the loving kindness you want, and you can step back off of that shining because you're so full of loving kindness. But the minute you step foot back into the city with other people, then you'll see how much you have perfected. It takes being in the mix. So don't look at it like it's such an aggravation. It is the great, wondrous training that we actually asked for to really know ourselves and to overcome our afflictions. So this week, when you go out, think that way with every irritation that comes. This is just what I asked for. Think about it like, oh, goody, and see how I'm going to react in this moment. And I'll tell you, you'll start laughing. If you don't laugh, you won't be mad all day. One day of madness becomes 1 hour of madness. And the other becomes, oh, that's all right. They can't even harm me, And that's how we'll grow and develop. And we'll be so pleased within our own selves that you can't do anything to me. That's where the strength comes. That's where the power comes. That's where the joy comes from. And the joy is what opens us up to the investigation of states, which opens us up to really seeing things as they are. You gotta have the joy. The joy comes first. And that's why we work on anger and resentment and cultivate the qualities of a good friend. So, yes.
I'm so glad you just said this, because I was just thinking recently that I need to go away and be alone somewhere in order to do this, because I keep coming up against, that anger comes up, and I know, and I realize it, and sometimes I keep quiet, and like you said, but then I still feel that anger there. It dissipates quickly usually, but I keep practicing.
That's a good point. He mentioned the elements as the object of awareness for anger. He said, remember he talked about air, fire, water, space, earth. And he says that you can spit in the wind, you can throw garbage in the water, you can, he said you can do all of this, but the elements are not offended. They're not humiliated. They're not disgusted. He said, let your meditation be like that. So he said for us to turn to the earth element, because you're feeling something, right? There's emotion. Where do you feel it?
Here. Usually.
Right.
Yeah.
In the body. And what's the body formed of?
Water, fire.
Yeah. He said, now that's the reality of it. So he says, turn your mind to one of the elements and ponder the nature of the element and know that this body is formed of that. Then a feeling just becomes a feeling that is informed by thinking. Yeah? And he's already told us to abandon the thinking. You counter the thinking with, he's doing something for my harm, but, and in that way it neutralizes the fear that provokes you to act in a certain way. That self-preserving kind of way. Yeah. So many people come here for a retreat, right? And they come and they're like, gotta be so quiet. Can't, the sweeping is disturbing me. You gotta be everything, and it's the same thing, as if that is what does it. But that's not what does it. Challenging the thinking that arises in the mind is what does it. And for that, you don't have to go anywhere. That doesn't mean you all shouldn't come to retreats, because you should. But what I want to say to you is that noble silence is noble silence. It's not noble just because you're silent, is what I'm trying to say. And we have something that's established here in this country today that everybody's tipping around and walking into slow-mo, like because they're in noble silence. But it's only noble when it's noble. That's all I'm saying. Don't be fooled. Noble silence is good, but make sure that the silence really is noble. And to do that, we have to deal with the thoughts that arise in the mind. Yeah. Any other comment? Yeah, Bob.
I found it interesting that you have now in the Sangha. I found it interesting when you talked very early on today about the growth of the Sangha here, the growth of friendship, and that you now have or will have 9 monastics here at Heartwood?
Yeah, right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we have 2, a Thich Nhat Hanh nun coming, that's 7. We have, who's the other one? She is, Theravada nun, that's 8. And the Bhante who came here a couple of years ago when we first opened is returning, that's 9. And then we have 1 more monk that has applied. And that makes 10. And then we have 2 visiting nuns from Thich Nhat Hanh. That'll be 12. But, you know, and I think it's wonderful. And I want the Sangha to know that householders, lay people, have attracted them. That's huge. That's what I want you to know.
The reason I brought it up is that I remember going back years and years that I thought that was one of your early goals. And it's nice to see it coming to fruition here.
Yeah. When we first came, that was our desire, but they didn't come. And but now they're coming. It's wonderful. May you be well and happy and peaceful. May no harm come to you, no danger. May you always be able to meet with the inevitable difficulties of life. Yes, honey,
Did you, I didn't quite hear clarity in the explanation about reading.
Around. When to read? Okay. Okay, so we're on chapter 6, which is one's own good and the good of others. Let me see in my book here, chapter. Okay, so this is 11 pages. So if you'll read chapter 6 by next Tuesday. And if you didn't read Good Friendship, it's short. It's just 6 pages. If you'll read it, but that one you put a marker in because you'll be using this throughout, because that's really the pivotal chapter in the book. All of this is about how to become chapter 6, how to become chapter 5. I'm sorry, the good friend. Yes.
All my life, I try to be prepared in an educational situation by reading to people, and I have not. And it was very uncomfortable, the first chapter, But I like it. I get much more out of what's being said if I don't know what's being said because I haven't read it. So I'm going to continue to not be prepared because I'm enjoying that a lot.
Okay, so that's the way we started. We would hear first and then we go back and read. Do we want to continue in that vein? If we do, then read up through chapter 5, review anger and speech and friendship. And Pannavati will start with chapter 6 next Tuesday.
Here in
Yes.
the middle of this whole class, and I thought, well, I haven't read the book. I said to Mary, I said to Mary, how am I going to fit in? How am I going to, how am I going to do this? And she said, well, her sister did, so I came. And everything just applies to my experience of life, just plopping in here in the middle, just so relevant. So
It is.
somehow, yeah. And now I want to get the book and,
Okay.
go further.
That's good. I think we have one left.
Oh, good. Okay, well, I just wanted to say I popped in
Thank
and
you.
everything was just like, this
Thank
is
you.
real. This is real.
Thank you.
Thank you.